Hey, Scott, thanks for joining today.
Hey, Paul, how's it going?
Awesome, awesome. I've seen you speak before. I've definitely enjoyed the one time I saw you in person. I've seen you online quite a bit. I definitely respect your message. You were a hostage negotiator, which is absolutely insane. And I know that you have just a depth of wisdom when it comes to communication and leadership and a number of other subjects. But we, on podcasts like this, we always have limited amount of time. So I would love to really dive into a little bit with you about communication, how it ties into, let's call it like the work environment, but really everything, even personal, everything revolves around communication and leadership. And I guess one of the initial conversations is, or the initial questions really is about really your speaking path too, though. I would like to talk to you just to start there a little bit about you, talk about a communication perspective. Getting up and speaking is one of people's biggest fears in life. You do it on a regular basis.
Yeah, I stumbled into my new career as a global keynote speaker. This began in 2016 when I was invited to give a TED talk. And most professional speakers work their way up from the Rotary and the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts up to the bigger stages. And TEDx, that's right at the top of the
Yeah.
professional speaker's desires. And I was invited to do this, and I didn't even know what it was. Like, I'm not sure I'd ever even seen a TED talk at that
Yeah.
point. But what the organizers were looking for was a speaker to have a talk around how can I have a conversation with someone who's different than me? How can I communicate with people in difficult situations, difficult emotional states? And my background as a SWAT crisis and hostage negotiator seemed to fit what they were looking for in their vision for this talk. And the context was it was the week of the US presidential election with Trump and Clinton. So everybody hated each other. There was negative social discourse. So they invited me to give that talk. And they said, hey, you communicate with people under pressure professionally. That's all we're asking you to do. So I was like, okay, good sales pitch. And I went up, gave the talk, and it's published on YouTube. It is The Secrets of Hostage Negotiators. And from there, some people watched it and they liked it and invited me to speak at this place and that place and the other place. And pretty soon I realized, hey, you can make money doing this, and move that from my side hustle to my professional full-time job just last year.
That is amazing. I genuinely like that story because you're right. So many people start from a different entry point. And I really do believe there is a way or times in our life that we really enter at, I don't want to call it a higher level because I don't really necessarily like the level because it's more of just a placement. But to start at that position, that's super cool. You said you weren't a speaker before that. So did you just pull something together quickly or you just spoke from the heart and you were able to riff on the subject?
They gave me 7 weeks, so they must have had a
Okay.
cancellation or an open slot in their programming, because usually this is a year-long thing, years-long thing. People prepare for this and they structure it. So I had 7 weeks to come up with the content of what I was going to share and then practice the delivery of how I was going to present this. So that was a pretty short period of time, and I wouldn't suggest that anybody take
Yeah.
their 18 minutes of a TED Talk and just wing it. But certainly, I came in with some ideas on the stories I wanted to tell and the points that I wanted to make, so it can have the best impact on the audiences that would be hearing this. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because I'm speaking from my work as a professional negotiator, but even the term negotiation is a big umbrella for a variety of other micro skills of how do we speak? How do we listen? How do we influence others? How do we get what we want? How do we manage ourselves under extreme pressure when we know that there's massive consequences to this particular conversation? And it turns out that all these skills are really coveted in the leadership world, that the
Mm.
great leaders, the most impactful leaders, should be doing a lot of these things. And in fact, Harvard packages this together in their class. It's negotiation and leadership, because these micro skills are serving both worlds almost the same.
Yeah. I like the word consequence. Sometimes when I'm talking about conversational or exchange, I'll use the word weight. Like, how weighted is this conversation? Meaning, how much does this impact me or the other person? But consequence is actually a pretty powerful word that, and it really truly is that because I think you're talking about hostage negotiation. You're talking about an absolute extreme situation where there is a true survival aspect to it, a we'll call it a life and death in some situations. I don't want to overgeneralize what you did there, but I think too, and you're also talking about as many different influences into this environment. But I would say too is that on a basic day to day level, I think that survival, the essence of survival, can sneak into our psyches and our emotional capacities, even in the smallest conversations. I sometimes I'll see people, or I've experienced it myself, where I walk away or I'm in the conversation, I'm extremely just anxious, disjointed. It feels prickly, and I'm not sure why. And a little self analysis later, and it's just there's this level of like survival. If this, and it's not like we're being attacked, it's just this feeling of deep resonance of insecurities. And I guess the psychology and the depth of where some of that can come in is it, I'll ask you, is it some, it's probably a lot of different influences, but some of it is obviously sourced in us about where our emotional mental capacities are. Some of it is us reading other people and seeing what that is. But do you feel like there's, when you're talking to somebody, is it, or I'll say in a very simple way, do you feel like most people are very self oriented when they're talking about in their conversation? Like, what I go talking to a wall a little bit, or just very self reflective and kind of me in most cases?
I think that is probably natural to be me in a conversation, that we're always looking out for ourself and our own self-interest. And certainly you touched on the element of fear, our own survival and self-protection. So I think that's pretty normal and natural. And it takes real effort to make it not about you, to have
Yeah.
that emotional intelligence that I'm beginning by managing myself, so I can clearly see what's going on the other side, to see where is this person's emotions at, where's their comfort level at. And so much of what we do begins with bonding and connection,
Mm-hmm.
that we can't have influence if we don't first have connection, because of what you just discussed, that if I'm fearful, I'm shut down, I'm closed off, how am I going to have the courage to take this step in the direction I need to go? And how many people go through life without having the courage to take that step? And
Yeah.
there are people listening in right now that saying, I wish I had that, or I need to have that. That's great self awareness to say, hey, you're even thinking about that, because the rest of the world is at home on their couch where they feel safe and comfortable, and they'll never put themselves out there. They'll
Yeah.
never post on social media. They'll just look and make comments to themselves about everybody else. But it takes some courage to get in that ring, to get in the center of what's going on. And why shouldn't it be for leaders an absolute foundational skill to learn to connect with the people that you serve? Because if
Yeah.
we're not connecting with people, how are they going to feel comfortable with you if they don't know what to expect? They don't know how this is going to work. And how will you ever be able to influence them or the organization or people more broadly if you are not getting people comfortable with you?
Yeah. So there's, when you were talking about that, I was almost hearing a little, or not hearing, but compassion and empathy. So there's two different parts of this: the compassion and empathy, and then there's also vulnerability with leaders. So these are two different things I want to bring in. But compassion and empathy in conversation. And I guess when I say that, I'm almost thinking of putting myself in somebody else's shoes, and that ability. Is there a point when we're talking about negotiation and hostage negotiation, we're talking about very extreme. There's a lot of consequences, a lot of weight in this, in that type of situation. Where is the place for empathy and compassion of this other, trying to identify? Or is it strictly a little bit more, I'll say, sterile or clinical when you're reading somebody or you're trying to discern where their head's at?
Yeah, and we can call it empathy. We title it a variety of different things. But for me, when I teach hostage negotiation or crisis negotiation to other negotiators across the US, I will teach them that the first step is to work to understand the situation, that we always have to work to understand, even before that conversation, during the conversation, throughout this whole process, because your power comes from information and options. And how are you going to get that if you're the one doing all the talking? The idea of empathy, I want to understand you. I want to have a good appreciation of where you're at, how you feel, what you're going through. That's really very helpful to me. That's not just touchy feely, hug a tree kind of thing, feel good stuff. This is giving me what I need to help resolve that problem,
Yeah.
because I can't solve the problem if I don't know what it is. So why not begin with the idea that I'm going to be a good listener And I challenge these leaders, these negotiators, to have the mindset that it's not about you. If you're
Okay.
in this conversation and I'm starting to hear, I did this, I did that, you're failing. If your power is information and options, you can't get that if you keep talking. So start
Mhm.
paying attention and start inviting the conversation. And I think this is a big piece that leaders miss. They don't invite the conversation. If you think as a leader, your open door policy is going to bring the conversation to you, you have no idea what you're doing. Because I'm not going to raise my hand as someone midway up on the organizational chart and say, hey, boss, I've got some ideas for this organization. A lot of things you're doing here isn't quite right. It takes a lot of guts to stroll into their office because there's consequence to that conversation. They may
Sure.
not like that. And what could happen to me? It's rare you're going to find a personality that's going to do that. So, are you inviting the conversation? And the only way you invite that conversation is by investing in that relationship and understanding this person and allowing them to have the feeling that my partner, whoever that is, or my leader,
Yeah.
cares about me. And once they feel you care about them a little bit, now they might open up. Now we might be able to uncover creative solutions and resolutions to get us to a place that we want to go that maybe weren't evident to us when we began that conversation.
Yeah. In your coaching, do you get into, or maybe not necessarily with your coaching or when you're working with people too? I know that for me, I've been in different leadership roles, and there's times where I'm very set on a task. I'm very set on a task. And if somebody were to just come in and be like, hey man, you're doing it all wrong. I've got a better idea than you. How I'm going to receive it at the time when I'm really focused is probably not the best. I'll just admit it. I'm not going to fly off the handle. I'll listen, but at the same time, I think, but if somebody said to me and came to me and said, or I allowed myself to be in a place of receiving, said, Scott, I would really enjoy some feedback about XYZ, and I really want to improve it. Let's go into a space of receiving and an allowance of the critique or the other views. Is that some of it? And is that a form of, I don't want to say a form of vulnerability, but there is this sense of vulnerability that I'm working with from a leadership perspective of being open and welcoming and receiving in this mindset that we're talking about. But I'll go back to that kind of finding a place of receiving, a window of receiving, and really like an intentional window of receiving and having those. Is that some of the stuff you work on, or is it a little bit more about more of the lifestyle of these exchanges of always being able to take not criticism but take suggestion?
Yeah. And this comes back to that psychological safety piece. I want to give you this feedback. I think most people do want to give that feedback if they care enough about their organization, which should be a good barometer. Hey, does this person even care?
That's true. You
Um,
said that. Yeah. I was
but
like,
that emotional availability, is this person emotionally available?
mm,
And do I experience that day to day? And is there a connection there? Because that's a pretty important question. If you're a leader and you're coming in and saying, hey, I want some feedback, I need to believe that you are able and willing to take this, and
yeah.
I'm not going to get hurt from being honest. So that I have to have a history of experience with you to say I've seen people speak up in meetings and make this suggestion and just get hammered down. I've
Yeah.
seen this once or twice, and all these things. We talk about connection and bonding in this connection piece. I want to propose that if you're not creating connection, you're creating disconnection. And
Mm,
even when we're not actively building relationships, you are still creating connection because we're watching you. If you're the leader, I am paying attention to your attitude, to your behavior. This doesn't have to have anything to do with me, but I'm watching so I can determine, hey, what's an acceptable risk for me to take here? And
yeah.
as leaders, it's about influence. When I'm doing negotiation, it's about influence so I can get what I want. It's not about my ego. It's not about me being right. It's about achieving an outcome that is acceptable. Are we focused on that when we're talking about leadership? Are we focused on this is what is the acceptable or our best outcome? Or is it about me? Is it about me looking foolish?
Right.
And how many leaders are not emotionally available, are not connecting with people in a way that they want to be connected with? And why is that? Are we afraid of our inadequacies? Are we afraid of being embarrassed? Are we lacking confidence? But
Yeah.
so much of what we do is around getting the influence that we want.
Yeah. Man, that's beautiful. You laid out a number of different things. And to start where I asked you was, where is it a lifetime of things, but the experiential points of in previous meetings. How was it received? Was it received with a little bit of a light recoil and maybe a little humor? Then okay, then that person's approachable. Was it, yeah, was the hammer dropped pretty much every single time, but now that person's going, tell me what I did wrong, and that they're just going to turn around and I'm not wrong. It takes time to build the trust and build the comfort and that ease around it. And I think that there's people that do, there are people of variant levels of communication and warmth and everything else, but there are people that really give off that they're approachable. And some people do hide behind their walls, and whether they're approachable or not is something that has to happen over those exchanges and interactions.
Mhm.
I really enjoy that. It was really something along those same lines. And I don't want to overcook the touchy feely aspect of the vulnerability and the openness.
Mhm.
But there was actually something else. Before I get into that, there was something else. I'd love to run something past you if you don't mind. There's in the, we'll call it in a business world, there'll be people that maybe on the org chart, let's go with that. Somebody like, let's say like on a lower portion of the org chart, approaching a manager, because it's the window we're talking about here. I've given advice to people, and because I've seen them get really worked up, and you can see that they're a little confused, they're not sure where the conversation is going. So I've given some advice, and if you have feedback on this, the awesome. If you don't, that's okay. But I've given kind of three little, maybe we'll call them measurement tools or little barometers they can keep an eye on, and maybe if they keep these things in their toolbox as they're talking to people and the conversation gets a little tough, maybe they can grab on one of these. So the three little things that I brought to the surface were, one is maybe take note on what's the angle of, we'll call it the wide angle or the specific. What are we talking about? The 32,000 foot wide angle view on this? Are we talking about something very specific, like the engineering, the nuts and the bolts? Are we talking about something very specific? And I believe you can actually ask somebody that in the middle of a conversation. I could say, Scott, are we right now? I'm not sure. You don't have to act all confused, but Scott, are we talking about the big picture? Or are we talking about this specific thing right now? Just so I make sure I'm on point. Another one is what I like to do is the left brain, right brain kind of thinking. It's like the creative or the logic. And are we in that strategic or the tactical, which is a little along the lines what I said in the last one, but there's still a little bit of difference in varying on. And the last one would be time. Are we talking about the past? Are we talking about right now? Or is this something projected in the future? Because not necessarily everybody is articulate and their words don't always come out how they mean it. If two people are talking really in the me states of survive and even into the survival aspect, if there's consequence or weight on the conversation, they might really be on two aspects, two different completely aspects on these charts and really not having the same conversation. So I think it's something about like dialing in those, creating the dials and tuning it into each other a little bit. It's how I view that. And I know there's a little bit of a long-winded thing and I threw a lot at you, but do you have like any thoughts on just some of those delivery tools or?
For sure. And first of all, I think the important question is, what is our goal here?
That's a
What
good
are
point.
we trying to achieve together in this conversation right now? And so often we can be disappointed because our negotiation partner, our boss, or whoever we're speaking with fails to meet the expectations that we have for that conversation or for that relationship when we've never expressed what those expectations are. And part of that is I don't want to lead up, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I can't be upset that whoever I'm working with didn't meet what I expected them to meet when I said, "Hey, I would really like to make sure that we clarify what the 32,000 foot goal is right here versus how do we get until Friday or what do we need to do right now?"
Yeah.
So, what is the goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? And I think that alone is a pretty good bonding technique because it turns out that when I'm negotiating with somebody, oftentimes a single individual who might be in crisis, their goal is, hey, I just want to survive this. I just want to get out of this. Hey, that's my goal
Yeah.
too.
Interesting.
We
Yeah.
actually have the very same goal right now, but we might be having different conversations. And just because we're focused on this part over here right now doesn't mean I'm dismissing this or I don't want to talk about that. But maybe we'll get to that. That can be our next conversation. But for now, let's be very clear that this is right here. And I think that when we have this disconnect, I'm talking about this, you're talking about this, we start to see frustration. And the first thing that goes when people get frustrated or stressed is their delivery, not what they say, but how they say it.
It's a
And
great point.
you'll be able to very clearly see when somebody is starting to be stressed. They're starting to become anxious or fearful because their delivery, their cadence is going to change. And that can be changes in the rate, the rhythm, the pressure, the volume, or the tone of what's being said. So I think that the real powerful influencers, the powerful leaders, are paying attention to that. And I can see I have a baseline behavior with you. I have a baseline communication level with you, whether it be over the last couple of weeks or the last couple of years. And all of a sudden, we're in a different place right now. And it could be higher, it could be lower. There is a change. I'm just looking for changes from baseline behavior to help indicate something's going on here. And so often the people who can't see beyond themselves are missing this valuable information. They're waiting for someone to state this. But in our nonverbals, in the delivery of how it's being said, they're telling you very clearly there's an issue. There's a problem, whether it's withdraw or a faster rate of speech or louder or nastier tone. There's so much information here. Are we paying attention to that? And are we managing ourselves first?
Yeah.
I'm not going to get the results I want if I can't manage myself first. So let's manage ourselves. Let's set clear expectations. Let's make sure that we have a common goal here. And we should be able to reach that if we're in the same organization. What are our common goals? And then be clear. Is that what we're discussing right now? So then my frustration isn't there. Hey, you don't care about me because you never discuss the big picture stuff. You're just worried about the day-to-day things. Okay, that's what I'm worried about now. But if we need to have this discussion next, I'm open to having it.
Yeah, the expectations was very powerful right there too. The expectations and then the assumptions begin and onto those big picture goals. Otherwise, people feel like somebody else is being dismissive of their perspective. And I can't. I'll go back to the expectations. I think so many people walk in with preconceived notions or what they want, the expectation that they want to deliver, and it can easily get lost and quick. Now you brought up also too the cadence, and I guess I'll call it reading people, but you can see when somebody's getting excited, when they're getting nervous, or maybe they're a little bit of a breath pattern or the word pattern in there and stuff. Do you? I guess I know there's a lot of training out there reading people. Obviously, in your line of work, I'm sure you had a lot of training on how to read people in those cadences or in the, and some of it is probably instinctual as well too, or as far as doing it for a long period of time, you become incredibly good at reading people. How much is that? Is I'll even ask, is that some of his nature, some of his nurture, people's abilities? Because I do know people. Some people have a very good way or a very good ability to read other people, or can
For
some of that
sure.
stuff be taught?
And those people seem to do better in life. Life's a little bit
Yeah.
easier for them. They can get what they want because it's like they're functioning inside people's heads. And for me, I don't think it was all that natural. I
Mm-hmm.
studied behavioral science for undergrad, psychology in grad school. I worked as a detective for over 5 years, worked as a negotiator for nearly 8 years. You have to be comfortable with others. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and you have to be comfortable with emotion. And so
Mm-hmm.
many people are uncomfortable with those negative emotions, and they, as soon as there's emotion there, they're trying to get out of it. They're trying to either rush through it or avoid it entirely to say I'm not going to go there. And
Yeah.
as someone who worked in law enforcement, who worked with victims of bad crimes and bad situations, you get a front row seat to really yucky emotional situations. So, not that I've grown completely comfortable with it, but it's a natural place for me to be with people. So, when the emotion comes on, I'm okay to go there with them.
Yeah.
So, are you willing to be emotionally available? Are you willing to bring that emotion? And there's deep connection there. When you can handle emotion, these are the difficult conversations that in this difficult conversation where you're going to be fired, demoted, you didn't get the promotion, whatever it might be, there's going to be emotions there. Do you
Yeah.
understand that in somebody else? And it doesn't take an expert to read, hey, I'm seeing some emotions. So why not acknowledge that? And why not be able to share, hey, I've been through this too? And that can open a huge door to say, I've been there too. I've experienced this. And maybe that's not what I'm posting on my social media. Maybe that's not what I'm sharing at the company meeting. But I want you to understand that I've had that experience where I didn't get selected, where I didn't get promoted, where I've experienced bad health, where I've had to take time off, where we've been financially strapped. And all of a sudden, this person feels a little bit less alone. And
Hmm.
think of how powerful that can be in creating a connection with somebody else when maybe that divide was there and they didn't feel like they could ever even have that conversation with you.
Yeah, that recognition really does go a long way. And obviously, especially when it's genuine, of course. And I think, too, is in that window, it jogged a little memory of mine. I remember there was a point where I I had a recognition with my responses in conversations, and a lot of times it wasn't. I used to think it was I was nervous about somebody else's response. Are they going to be upset? Are they going to think? It was actually I was a little bit more nervous about my response. It was almost that thing of don't provoke me or try to poke the bear just to get a rise out of me, and I didn't want to just take myself out of the game. So it was that some of it was even my my concern of how what my responses were going to be and what I was bringing back into the conversation. And I would get a little nervous about, are you trying to provoke me or pull me into some weird manipulation conversation? And it's either do I have to become complicit and do I have to be a willing participant with you and give into it, or am I going to try to get upset and I don't want to get upset? So don't make me upset. So it was a little bit of more concern about this was just an observation. I'm didn't know if you could appreciate it or not, but I'm assuming you do. But yeah, some of it was about my visceral response. I was more worried about that than I was about somebody else's.
For sure. And let's talk about the methods of communication. Does anybody even consider this when we're communicating? What methods are we using to communicate? And so often we just default to wherever that began. If you send me a text message, I send you a text message. You send me an email, I send you an email. We're on the phone, we're on Zoom, we're in person. And are we using this to our advantage? You're talking about your reactions. Let's do this example. We're on a Zoom call, we're face to face, and you say, "Hey, Scott, we want to hire you to be our keynote speaker at our next event, and we're going to pay you $75,000 to be our keynote speaker." You're going to see a response. I'm not going to say anything, but you're going to see a little surprise, a little
Yeah,
happiness, a little excitement. And
sure.
immediately, if you're paying attention to me, something's got to be clicking in your brain going, "Oh no, we just made an offer
It's just
way
overbid.
overbid." Right.
We
But
can't.
if
We
I'm on
can't. 25
on
grand.
the phone with you, you say, "Hey, we want to offer you $75,000 to be our keynote speaker." I can make the same face and I can
Nice.
respond to you, "That sounds a little bit low, doesn't it?" And now you're going to panic saying, "Hey, can we go up to 100,000 with this guy or not?" Because you missed that information. So
Sure.
your power is information and options. Are we paying attention to this? And are we choosing how we want to communicate?
Yeah.
And so often people don't use it to their best advantage to say, "I want to see you face to face." When I'm a detective interviewing people, I don't even want there to be a table. I want them to have a chair and I want to have a chair so I can see everything about them. There's nothing that you can hide in your nonverbals. I'm watching for everything because there's going to be something there. You just have to
Yeah.
be paying attention. You have to be willing to look for it.
Absolutely. I think that in not to jump from that because this is a big leap, but I was going to say is even with coaching, speaking, really being in the room is really the most powerful when you're communicating with somebody. And obviously, it's the text and the email. Obviously, we're doing the video conference, but being in the room with somebody and you can just, I know for myself, I can feel somebody's energy. You can feel the shift, even if they don't say anything, or you even brought it up. You can see a little bit of light, little glimmer in your eye. You're like, oh man, I overbid, or a little micro expression or something like that, a little smirk or whatever it is. But those exchanges. Now, do you? I'll and here's where I was jumping a little bit because you do the coaching and stuff. I'm just assuming the in-person coaching versus the virtual coaching, there's just a much more powerful resonance with being in person. Or if you do group coaching with, and I'd like to actually ask you about your, before we close out today, I would like to ask you about some of the your business and stuff with that. But clearly that in-person coaching is just going to have much more of an impact.
Yeah, I think so. We offer training classes both virtually and in person. And there's an energy when you're in person in a group and you can see everybody. And virtually, a lot of people don't even bother to turn on their cameras, particularly if it's just earning some CEUs rather than showing up for a company event when your boss is on the call.
Sure.
You're losing that information. And then you're losing that connection, and then you're losing that influence. And it's a tough thing right now where companies are trying to have the competitive advantage by offering flexibility in their work. I want to work from home, I want to work remotely.
Yeah.
Are you still able to effectively build that bond with your team and the people you serve? And some people are good at that. and they can manage that, and they're checking in regularly. And some people, even with the advantage of working in person, I'll share with you, at a former employer of mine, my boss worked 3 or 4 doors down the hall from me, and a week would go by and I wouldn't see her or hear from her for any reason, not even a check in. Hey,
Mm.
how's it going? What's going on there? So just
Right.
because we're working in person doesn't mean magically we're all bonding and connecting. Not the
Yeah.
case at all. That
Yeah.
you need to have good leadership. But there's certainly a difference, to answer your question, between the virtual experience, where I can only see shoulders up. I don't have a full understanding or appreciation. And then the accountability piece, when, hey, we're all in the room together, you're off reading the newspaper or vacuuming the floor, things you can't really get away with when we're in person. So I've
Yeah.
always found much more energy and much more impact when we're doing classes in person.
Absolutely. That engagement, that buy-in, it's truly right there. You're truly present with somebody. You have no allowance to not be, in a sense. Yeah.
For sure.
So that's awesome, man. Where can people find you? More information about you? I'm only assuming you have a website, and is that the best way to get a little bit more information?
Sure, you can learn a little bit about my speaking work at scotttillema.com. For corporate training around conflict resolution and negotiations, if that may be of interest or value to you, you can check us out at negotiationscollective.com. But also, I'm a real person. If you're on LinkedIn, let's connect on LinkedIn. Send me a message. I'll hit you back. Love to have those conversations with people. And I think that by having these different avenues and inviting your audience to reach out, if this is connecting with you, I'd love to talk with you, because I believe strongly we can make the world a better place through the two simple concepts of communication and connection. Then we can find influence, we can find peace, we can find happiness, not only for us, but for the people we serve and love.
When you say that too, you're very approachable and that genuine connection point. I really do believe that in what you're doing. So I thank you. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks for having me on.
Awesome.